Clock just turned 11 a.m. Central Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome everybody to Getting Through the Day. Today is part 2 of our series, and we are going to be talking about stress and what it's like being overwhelmed. Last week our topic was fatigue, and it was titled Tired of Being Tired. And next week we will be here on Monday talking about family chaos and changes in routines in your family. These sessions are brought to you by your local Purdue Extension educators. Today you get 2 of us. Myself, I'm Jo Gilreath, and I'm a health and human sciences educator in Warwick County. Also with us today is my colleague from Knox County, Tanya Short. And on the call is Megan Brothers from Vanderburgh, and she will be presenting next week. I think everyone's pretty familiar with Zoom, but just a friendly reminder to please keep yourself muted. We are going to be doing some interactive things today through the chat box, so get ready to add comments. If you have any questions, put them in the chat box, and Tanya and I will be monitoring that. Please note that today's session is being recorded, so it can be viewed by people later. And you will be receiving instructions at the end on a link that you can go to obtain a certificate of completion if you need that. Just real quick, a reminder of who Extension educators are and where we come from. We are part of the National Cooperative Extension Service. All states in the United States provide research and education out in their communities. Here in Indiana, we have extension offices in all 92 of our counties, and it is through Purdue University. And we like to say the community is our classroom. Health and human science educators like myself and Tanya share university information that focuses on food, family, money, and health. So our goal in today's 45 or so minute session is to provide you with some practical tips for coping with everyday stress. You know, talking about stress is a good thing. It may be uncomfortable, but it is a necessary step in the coping process. We hope you walk away with a better understanding of the prevalence of stress, what stress is, what your own signs and symptoms are, and what to do to manage your stress. We intend to have some audience engagement, and it will be helpful for you to maybe have something to write some notes on, because we're hoping that you get some takeaways. So it would be safe to say that you're here today because you have been or currently are stressed. Are you the only one experiencing stress? Well, you're not the only one on this webinar. Right now, we've got 23 people attending. When you're out and about, you might see people looking like these photos on the screen. Men, women, children, all ages. They are experiencing stress just like you and me. And based on the photos that I pulled up when I Googled stressed person, I mean, anybody putting their hand on their face or doing something strange with their mouth is apparently stressed. But in all seriousness, we most definitely have seen an increase in stressed people during the COVID pandemic. Last week at Mental Health America's annual conference, they reported that they have seen a 2 to 3 time increase in the self-reporting of people with symptoms of stress and anxiety and depression since the pandemic started. So it is okay to admit that you are experiencing stress. This is a time to put perfectionism to the side and be realistic and honest about what you can do and cannot do. And being here today is a great sign of your willingness to address the subject. So often people will ask, what is the difference between stress and a mental health disorder or illness? You may wonder, if I'm stressed, does that mean I have a mental health disorder? You might ask, how do I know what's okay and not okay? How do I know if this is something serious or if I'm over concerned? I mean, those are all good questions. The important thing to know is this fact. 1 in 5 adult Americans will have a mental health condition at some time in their life. 1 in 5. So there's a pretty good chance that you might at some time have a mental health condition. Despite the occurrence of this, there continues to be a negative stigma, unfortunately, about mental health, and that can result in people not admitting or talking about what they are thinking and feeling. So to better understand what you are experiencing, we want you to start by opening up to yourself and to others. Don't be so concerned about what is this. Just pay attention to what you are experiencing. Here is a list of kind of the typical signs of symptoms related to mental health. Now, we all experience what's on this list at some time to some degree. Feeling hopeless, withdrawing from social things, having changes in our mood, difficulty sleeping, focusing, those types of things. Think of them as being on a continuum. I mean, they can range on a scale of 1 to 10. When to seek professional help would be if these symptoms are on the higher end of the scale, if they're negatively affecting how you function, if they're interfering in your ability to do your daily activities, or if they are prolonged or quite dramatic. So you need to know what your normal is, what your usual is on that continuum, and then gauge how much you are deviating from that. Our point of today's educational program is to talk about steps that you can take from a self-help angle to manage your symptoms. And at the end of the presentation, we will also be providing resources for how to obtain professional help. So let me ask you, how do you describe stress? So if we were in person sitting around a table, we'd start writing on a whiteboard or putting Post-it notes up. So I'm going to ask you to put your comments in the chat box. They are anonymous. Just how do you describe stress for you? And remember, there's no right or wrong responses.
So Ed says, by symptoms, distracted with worry. Rob says, life, double exclamation point. Frustrating, overthinking, clenched jaw, sleep disturbances. So getting a lot of good symptoms here that we might recognize in ourselves. Sleep issues.
Okay. Well, what's really impressive is nobody had to think too long. Boom, those comments started coming right in. So again, you are not alone with what you're experiencing, and stress. It is quite common. But you probably heard some differences. So it can vary from person to person. Stress is not just one thing. We use the word pretty universally, but it's kind of generic. So you have to ask some qualifying questions of what does the stress mean to you. So let's take, any more come in, Tanya, before I move on?
Hair falling out, overwhelmed, problems with sleeping, constant worry, can't focus, overwhelmed, no sleep, short fuse. Okay. We just wrote the book there. Yep. Yeah.
So the good news is you guys are all on target, because those are all very normal and appropriate signs and symptoms of stress. So let's take one step back, though, and ask yourself, what causes our stress? You told me what stress means to you, but what causes it? There's probably no surprises here on this list, but the general root causes include finances, relationship strain, injury, disease, disability, fear of the unknown, social isolation, social unrest, discrimination, worry about family, friends, children, and other. So I want to hear from you. What's your other? What is not on that list that to you is a cause of stress? And I do think moving forward on every list like this, it's now going to say pandemic.
Well, a few of those on that list are kind of as a result of the pandemic, right? We have at least one vote that says all of the above. All of the above with a special emphasis on health issues. Not enough hours in the day.
Yes.
All of the above. Work, too much to do, a lot of Zooms, right? And so we give you another one. Work-related, job ambiguity, all of these things, but not knowing how to find help. Too big of a to-do list, never leaving the house. Yeah, we were all starting to feel that this summer, right?
Yeah, good. So good. I mean, I don't think there's any surprises there. I don't think anybody's alone in what they said. I mean, nothing came out of left field there. So it's safe to say we all have stress. It comes in different forms. And the one about not having enough time, we often hear people say, I have too much on my plate. I mean, something is always not getting done, or if people ask me to do something else, what am I not going to do that? And we do know that parents have a higher level of tend to rank higher on the stress scale. One study showed that if you were parenting, 46% ranked their stress at the end of the scale, 8 to 10, versus 28% of the childless adults rated that high. So the parenting people were more stressed. So you know what your stressors are. Now we're going to talk about how you know when you are stressed. What's your tell? What is your sign and symptom? And keep in mind, it could be a feeling, something physical. It could be a thought and an emotion, and it could be a behavior, something that you're doing. So throw in the chat what you think, feel, or do when you are stressed. And if you aren't sure or aren't aware of that, ask yourself, how do other people around me know that I am stressed?
So we've got irritability, stomach ache, over worry, lack of interest, irritable, jaw clenching, GI issues, getting angry, high blood pressure, increase in your blood pressure.
Yep. So I already heard a mix of the feeling, the thinking, and the doing. And it's one little tip is to just kind of keep those three categories in mind, because as you move forward in better understanding your stress and wanting to pick up on your symptoms sooner versus later, sometimes we get locked into one category. Like, when I'm stressed, I know I start to have all or nothing thinking, or I get negative in my mind. I kind of can quickly associate with my thoughts, but I need to ask myself, wait, what am I feeling emotionally, or what is my behavior? How do people around me sense based on my behavior? So keep in mind those three categories for the signs and symptoms for your tell, and keep working on that. Another chart we just threw up just shows those again, and I think a lot of these people mentioned. We talked last week, if you were on the fatigue call, about some of the things that we know help and don't help our body physically and can result in fatigue. And so you'll see some of those things here under the actions, not eating appropriately, relying on substances outside of moderation, not getting sleep, those kinds of things can factor into our stress. So any questions at this point before we move on to the next session on signs and symptoms of stress? Okay. Great.
And I will share that. Thank you, Joe. I will share that this chart actually came from a publication from Michigan State University that I use. I teach a program that is specifically with farmers and agribusiness persons. And so this publication came out with some of the work that they did in that area, but I like to use it in my other programs because it gives us this really nice chart that we can glance at and say, you know what, I do that. or I hadn't connected my increased heartburn to directly correlate with my increased stress level. So maybe giving you some extra things to think about, or potentially even using the handout as a conversation starter if you're attending today because you're worried about someone in your family. And we're going to share at the end where all these handouts are posted so you can get full copies of them.
Right.
So as many of you alluded to, stress affects pretty much every part of our body. So the whole point of this graphic was not that you would actually be able to read it. I understand you probably can't, but that you can see the arrows and that it's pointing to every body part and every system, and it affects your body in really dramatic and significant ways. So there's lots of reasons that we should go the extra mile to try to get our stress under control. But first I have a question. Do you think, is all stress bad? I see at least one head shaking no, two heads shaking no. For those of you I can see, Ed says emphatically no. Okay, you guys are right on track. It is not bad. In fact, we actually need a little bit of stress in our lives, because if we don't have any at all, we're just sitting on the beach all day with someone waiting on us hand and foot. We have nothing to do. We are bored to death. Okay, we need a little bit of tension in our lives, a little bit of deadline, a little bit of something to keep us motivated, to keep us here in this healthy, focused range, right? Or optimally at this peak performance. So I guess I should have backed up and said, as our performance, this is the performance on the y-axis, and as our stress level increases on the x-axis. But once we cross this kind of threshold in the middle here, where we've got a little bit too much stress, more than we can handle, more than we can process or deal with effectively, it can make us mentally sick, and ultimately it can make us physically sick, which is what we want to not get to that point, right? I want to keep you in the green and the yellow. And someone in the chat said it protects you. Stress does protect you, right? It gets you moving, as long as it's in a level that we can manage and navigate. But to put this graphic into layman's terms, I just couldn't pass up this graphic. I want to keep you on this uphill slope. I can totally handle this. I can do it. We are gonna make it. If you feel yourself falling on that downward slope where you're saying, I cannot handle this, I can't make it, I don't know what I'm going to do, that's when I really want you to be aware and think about kind of what Joe said in the beginning, where we all have these signs and symptoms, but when it begins to affect what I call our live, laugh, love, our ability to enjoy life, our ability to have productive work, our ability to have satisfying relationships, if it's affecting us in those significant ways, then we really need to reach out for professional help. But the caveat to this about stress and is it bad or not, there's some emerging lines of research that show us that our perception of stress can actually have a pretty significant impact on how negatively or not that stress in itself affects our body. In fact, there was a recent study that looked at data from 186 million Americans, so a pretty large data set, and they found that those who strongly believe that stress affects their health were 4 times more likely to report poor health status and 5 times more likely to report psychological stress. And perhaps that's because we get this negative feedback loop that I tried to depict here. So we're feeling stressed, we have our stress response, we think it's bad, it causes us even more worry, which compounds that stress. And when we get stuck in this loop, that's when we should become worried and start thinking and reaching out for help. The other thing that happens is when we are in a high state of stress, our frontal lobe here that handles rational decision making, it goes offline, so to speak. Someone pulls the Ethernet cable and it is no longer our primary source of data to tell us how to act, and react. Rather, our amygdala, which is a tiny little portion in the center of our brain, which controls our emotional responses, becomes highly, highly activated. And all at once, everything seems impossible and really hard to manage. And at some point, it becomes no longer a matter of willpower or determination because your brain chemistry has actually been altered by staying in this high state of stress for a really long time. So we're thinking about long-term chronic stress, stuff that a lot of people have probably likely been experiencing in the last, has it been 6 months now? That our entire world has been a little bit backwards, to say the least. The good news is, though, is that it is reversible. And so we're going to talk about some of those skills that we can put into place to keep our rational center, our frontal lobe online, and keep our emotional center kind of in balance where it should be, so that it's not controlling us and making us feel out of control. But I should pause there and say, not all coping tools are created equal. And so I would like to see if any of you could put examples in the chat box of a positive and or negative coping tools that you've seen used.
Yoga, gratitude journals, exercise, substance abuse, prayer, take a walk, using honey and salt, supposed to lower cortisol, yoga, breathing exercises, spa, positive thinking. Something positive, going to the spa, something negative, drinking. Just checking out and playing with my kid, working out, alcohol, having alone time, self-care.
Yeah, so I think you guys have a pretty good idea where I was going with that there. So some of those negative coping tools that you shared are like these bent nails here. We're using the wrong tool, and we are just battering the heck out of this, but not going anywhere, right? But if we have the right tool to fit our needs, we can hammer that nail straight in and have a seamless transition. And so that's what we want to go for. The struggle is, and the challenge is that it can take time for us to build up these new skills and to kind of redirect, if you will, when we're used to being in a certain pattern. And so it can be tempted to give up or to go back to old habits before we've really mastered or given those new skills a chance to really see if they're going to work or not. And so what are some of these things that we're going to talk about, suggestions we're going to give to you? It sounds like some of you are already doing a few of these. My hope is that if you didn't already pull up that piece of paper when Joe suggested it, that you would do it now. And if you only write down one thing from the rest of our talk here today, then that is fantastic, right? And behavioral change and behavioral science shows that if you try to change too many things at once, you're probably not going to fulfill any of them. So just picking one or two things that you feel like you can do is a good and excellent place to be. So number one coping tool is self-care. This is a really hot word these days, but because generally speaking, we don't do enough of it. Many people also balk at the idea because the concept seems selfish or maybe undoable, as many people talked about not having enough time. And they're, having so many things pulling at your time and energy. Likewise, in our current climate, healthy routines we may have had established for ourselves may have been thrown off kilter, and we're having trouble getting back to that place where we were. But I have a question for you. If you think you can't take time for self-care, what do they tell you when the stewardess on the airplane is giving you the safety instructions at the beginning of the flight? If the air oxygen masks deploy, what are you supposed to do? Put your mask on first. Thank you, Ed. Because you are no use to anyone else. You are no use to yourself if you don't take care of yourself first. And as a working mother of a very young child, well, I guess in my head, he's so young. He's almost 4, but I am no use to him if I cannot keep myself straight, right? And I have to remind myself that all the time. And so praise God for him, because I have done way more self-care because of him than I would have ever done otherwise. I was a workaholic, never say no to anything ever kind of person, and he has forced me to slow down and make that time for myself, because if I can't be in a good frame of mind, then I can't be the best mother that he deserves. So some other things that we're going to go through in the next few slides is owning your feelings, learning to let go. We're going to touch base a little bit more on our nutrition and exercise, the power of self-talk and social connections, and making that personal time. So number one, own your feelings. So there's a cliche, right, of letting things bottle up until they explode. Well, that's absolutely true and not healthy. In order to manage our overwhelming feelings, we have to do a few things. Number one, we have to allow ourselves to feel them. That's not always comfortable, and we may not always feel like that's convenient, right? I don't have time for this. How many of you have ever said, I don't have time for this? But by suppressing negative emotions, you also inadvertently alter your ability to feel positive emotions too. Basically, if you bury one, you bury both. So it's really valuable to let ourselves feel what we're feeling. And we can do that by practicing naming them. So we might feel bad, but what is really causing that bad feeling? You might feel angry, but what is driving that anger? Is it guilt? Is it fear? And number three, write about them. Journaling your feelings is a safe way to try to sort through what you're feeling. It engages different processes in the brain and allows you to move through those, and you might come up with thoughts or conclusions that you wouldn't have otherwise. There's just something magical about that pen and paper. And lastly, talk about them. Find a trusted friend, someone who can give you feedback, or someone who can just listen. Tell them what you need. And so lastly, this wheel is just to exhibit that there are many, many, many different emotions that we can feel. If you are still struggling to understand or manage your emotions, I would strongly suggest considering contacting a trained professional who can help you through that process. And this could be a long-term commitment, or it could be just a few sessions to really help you get over that roadblock that you're currently facing. Next, let go. So I want you to say this with me. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this is so hard and takes so much practice, but it is so important. So I want you to think about some of the current stressors that were brought to your mind earlier when we did those activities, and admit to yourself, how many of them do you actually have real control over? Like full, I could truly do something about this control. And if you can't, and I would encourage you to really sit down and think about this later when you kind of have time to yourself, the ones that you don't have any really ability to do anything about, and they're just causing you unneeded worry, what is an action item that you can take to be able to metaphorically take them off your plate so that that's no longer draining you emotionally or physically? By let it go, I also mean, what are you doing to slow down, to relax, to meditate? I know that word kind of has some, depending on the audience, if you use the word meditate, you might get a little mixed reaction because it conjures up this image of somebody sitting cross-legged on a yoga mat with their fingers in a certain position saying Om, which it can perfectly well, but meditation is also just, and mindfulness is just about being aware, about intentionally training your consciousness on a specific thing or on nothing if you just need to clear your mind. And I actually want to practice something with you right now. This is called, I don't know if this exercise has a fancy title or not, Joe might know. I call it the 5-4-3-2-1. And again, just like last week, if you joined us for the deep breathing exercise, if you want to, actually, I take that back. You can't close your eyes because the first part of it is using your eyes. So there's something about engaging your senses intentionally that can help center and bring you back into focus. So right now, I want you to look around yourself and I want you to identify and name out loud 5 things that you can see. So I'm going to look in front of me and I'm going to say, I can see my webcam. I'm going to say that word out loud to myself. So go ahead and do that. And now I want you to engage your hearing and I want you to name to yourself 4 things that you can hear. And now I want you to engage your sense of touch or feeling and name 3 things that you can physically feel. So maybe it's your pants touching your legs. In my case, maybe it's my fingertips being really cold because the air conditioner is still running. Next, I would like you to identify 2 things that you can smell. So our sense of smell. And lastly, what is one thing that you can taste? And so I didn't ask you to assess your body before we started that, but can you physically notice any difference in the way you feel after you forced yourself to focus, even for like, what did that take, 30 seconds? Most people have the cameras off, so I'm pretending you're all nodding your head yes to me. And before we leave this slide, I'll just share one more quote that I really, really love. And it says, "Dare to be what you are and learn to resign with a good grace all that you are not." Thank you for that thumbs up, Yolanda. So we are what we are. And the more that we can accept ourselves for who we are and build on our strengths instead of, focusing on that other, the more satisfied we can be with where we are. So next, just to tag back a little bit on last week, there is a very, very strong correlation between mental health and what we choose to put in our body. So the "you are what you eat" phrase has a lot of merit. And I'll just give you some stats. This is from an infographic that came from Mental Health America on a campaign they did last year or the year before. 35% people who eat a well-rounded diet that's focused on whole foods, so not a lot of processed fast foods, junk foods, those kind of things, are 35% less likely to develop depression. Okay, and conversely, people who have a diet that's really, really high in these high processed, fried, sugary foods that have low nutritional value can have an increased risk of developing depression by as much as 60%. So there's a pretty significant statistical impact that has been reinforced by multiple studies to show us that what we eat can have a huge relationship to how we feel, as we talked about last week. And the challenge there can be that, man, when I'm feeling down, I'm just bummed, or something happened, didn't go my way, I messed up, whatever, fill in the blank. Am I thinking, oh, I'm going to go reach for a kiwi? No, my blessed coworker who brought in the carriage of cupcakes, right, is going to be tempting me because I'm trying to quell those emotions. Not everybody works that way, but I know a lot of them do. So next, as we talked last week, physical activity is really important. It not only can help filter the stress hormones out of our body to help us calm down, it can also boost a number of beneficial hormones and other brain chemicals to make us feel more even keel and ready to take on the day. And the effects are more than just momentary, although if you've had a heated discussion or you're feeling upset, going for that walk in the moment can help you regain your center. But with regular exercise, these effects can help you even create a new equilibrium. So in some cases, Regular physical activity has been shown to be at least as effective, if not more effective, than prescription antidepressants. But just like those prescriptions, you don't just take one pill and instantly feel better. It takes some time for the effects to take hold. And the hardest part is that when we're feeling really down, just like with the healthy eating, it's hard to get motivated and to get up and get going. So my recommendations there would be that you, number one, pick an activity you can enjoy, something you know you can stick with, something you know fits your schedule, and maybe even consider doing something with a friend or a neighbor so you can keep each other accountable. Okay, I know that Susan is going to be meeting me at the stop sign waiting to go for a walk at 6 a.m. If she said she would get up and be there, I'm sure as heck not going to leave her hanging, right? So putting things like that in place that you can be sure that you don't kind of let yourself hit the snooze and say, oh, I'm going to do it one more time, or I'm going to sleep in one more time. Not to imply that it has to be done in the morning. That's totally not where I was going there. But I would also say that you don't need a gym. That brisk walk will do. Or there's like a plethora of YouTube videos that are free. That's my personal go-to. And you can find pretty much anything to fit your style, preference, and fitness level. So there is a lot there to be had. And please, if you have questions or comments as we go, just drop them in the chat. So next is self-talk. This quote, be careful how you talk because be careful how you talk to yourself because you are listening. So this is entirely true. When we have those negative ruminations, we are actually fueling connections in our brain that reinforce those negative thoughts. So at some point, those connections become so forged in our brain that they become really hard to overcome. So one of the steps we can do a day at a time is thinking about how we are talking to ourselves. And what I always say to folks is if you wouldn't say it to your friend, then you shouldn't be saying it to yourself. So are we treating ourselves like a friend? Are you being a friend to yourself? And so in the moment with that piece of paper, I know you've been diligently taking notes with, I would like you to think about like, what is one or two or three things that you need to say to yourself more often that you deserve to hear? You've got this. You're a great mom. You can do it. You've overcome before. Don't stop trying. And if we were in person, I would actually pass out sticky notes and have you write those notes down and then ask you to go back home and either put it on your computer where you would see it every day, on the bathroom mirror, on the refrigerator door, somewhere where you can frequent and be reminded that you are valuable. So social connection. Oh, we talk about this all the time lately, right? Sort of. We could do an entire talk just on social connection, but the short story is that those who have connections are more likely to have better health outcomes, both physically and mentally, and be more resilient in facing life's setbacks and challenges. So what actually is a social connection? It is simply having a sense of belonging with others. And the number of others is not nearly as important as having that deep sense of connection and belonging. So lastly, I would talk about personal time. What helps you unwind? What do you do to relax? In the chat box, if anyone would care to share. Kathy says she reads. Few people are reading. Yeah, taking a bath. With bubbles or no? Run, journaling, doing stretches, sports, spending time with their spouse, a whirlpool jet bath. Oh, I'm jealous. Physical activity. So do you get to do these things as often as you want to or as often as you should be doing them for yourself? I've got a few no's coming in, and a few tryings too. So that was kind of my last point that I had for this slide. Going back to that airplane analogy with the oxygen mask. What can you do to find time? Or would I say make time? We have to force ourselves to make time, right? If we don't plan our day ends up planning ourselves. And so lastly, I would like to circle back around to, and then there was a pandemic, right? So it's common and it's fine to spend some personal time watching the news or on social media platforms. But there's a lot of mixed data out there on the value of social media. And especially now when our country is in such upheaval for multiple different reasons. I personally have noticed there being an increase of unhealthy behaviors happening on social media. And so I would just encourage you to limit the amount of news that you consume and to be careful who you are connecting with on social media. Those can be really valuable platforms for helping us to stay connected. You know, the reasons in which they were originally brought to life, right? For example, to help family members who stay in different states to stay connected. But if you find that being a drag on you and making you feel emotionally just wiped out, then I would challenge you to think about either the amount of time or the kind of things that you're being exposed to and seeing if there's ways that you can change the settings on those. And lastly, we would say we wanted to make a point about the difference between physical distancing and, you know, we've used this word social distancing, right, for the last 6 months, but really to think about that as physical distancing, but what are we doing to still stay socially connected? And I have lots of people say, well, I'm not on Facebook, or I don't do XYZ, you know, or this, that, or the other. There's always lots of excuses why, but as far as like technology goes and those challenges, but I would like to remind you, there's this old-fashioned thing called a phone. You dial a number and you can be instantly connected with anywhere all the way around the world, right? So we have lots of things at our fingertips that we just, for whatever reason, we've gotten out of the habit of using. So how can we put those back into practice to stay connected? And so in conclusion, kind of this is the summary slide taking us right back to the beginning of this section. Some of the things that we talked about, owning our feelings, being mindful and letting go, thinking about our nutrition and physical activity habits and how we talk about ourselves, what we can do to stay or ignite our connections that may have been challenged due to the pandemic or due to other reasons, just from moving around. You know, you say we'll stay connected, but then that's always so hard, right? And how can you plan your days to make sure that you are giving yourself time? Joe was saying walk around the neighborhood and waving 6 feet away at neighbors feels good and is a social connection, right? And our neighbors, we could do a whole nother talk show on neighborhood vitality too, right? You were going to say something, Joe?
I was just going to say it's been one silver lining in the stay-at-home time and sheltering in, and I've seen way more people in my neighborhood walking around, spending time out. The weather was conducive to that, and so we've been able to be friendlier, and we have just been waving. We're not stopping and having conversations, but it feels good. So I like that, just even the small things, and just want to remind people that self-care doesn't have to be an hour long. I mean, it's great if we can take that long, but 10 minutes here and there adds up just like physical activity. So just squeeze it in whenever you can, even if you're multitasking.
And there's a whole nother talk show too on talking about multitasking, right? So now is a really good time for all of you note takers to write down, and we'd love it if you shared in the chat as well, if you don't mind, to share, like, is there 1 or 2 things that you wrote down that you really think you can walk away from today and do to decrease your sense of being overwhelmed? Kirsten said, setting reminders to help me for self-care.
And for those of you on today's call that also were with us last Monday talking about fatigue, we gave you some tips and some ideas. And so maybe there was something this past week that you tried related to your energy level, because that's all part of self-care too. So we'd love to hear any feedback on that.
I see lots of making time, owning my feelings, staying connected, positives. I need to stop being so hard on myself sometimes. Isn't that the mantra of so many people? I mean, yeah. Don't ignore how I really feel. That is a dangerous trap. Making time for self-care. And so it's really easy for us to say, we go to a talk and we get all excited, we get an idea. I hope you're all really excited. I'm pretending like you're super excited right now to have been here and learned with us. And we walk away and we say we're going to do something. But if we don't plan for that implementation step, it often never happens. So if we're going to make more time, how are we going to do that? If we're going to stay more connected, how are we actually going to do that? If we're going to do more self-care, what is the self-care activity you're going to do, and when are you going to do it? So these are things for you to think about as you make this plan. And like I said in the beginning of my section, it's not easy and it takes time. Like I shared, my son is 4. Really only in the last few months have I been able to figure out a regular exercise routine, because I'm a single mom. It's just me and him. I was getting up at one point at 4:30 in the morning, and by golly, that kid heard me and would get up. So I'd get like 10 minutes. I'd get just warm enough that I was a little sweaty, and then there he was waiting to cuddle. Well, what do you do then? So I finally, after trying it 16 different ways, I now stay at work after work and put on a YouTube video, and I exercise before I pick him up from daycare. I show up a sweaty mess, and his preschool teacher probably wonders what I'm doing after work, but you know what? It's what I have to do, and it's what I figured out will work for me. And that took almost 4 years to get it into place. Of course, him growing up a little bit helped a lot, but I share that story just to say that it takes many, many tries sometimes, and we have to be persistent and determined. So, the next slide here, these are some resources that will have additional information. If you're looking for something specific, we have created a website to put all these handouts, and also all of those links are on that web page as well. And I'm trying to close out the million screens I have here. I'm going to drop it in the chat box. This is case sensitive, so if you write it down, be sure to note the case sensitive characters. Else, oh, it didn't come up as a link. I apologize. So you should be able to cut and paste that into your web browser and go to the website. And what else have we got here, Joe?
I want to say this is where we would remind you, if you feel like you do need to talk to a healthcare professional, a good first step, of course, is to call your current healthcare provider. Everybody has different network and insurance and connections. So start with who you already have a relationship with. See what resources are available through that provider, or who they would recommend, or who's covered as part of your network with your insurance. Because there's lots of wonderful people out there. It's important that you feel comfortable who you're talking to. If you want to do something a little more anonymous or quiet, then you can go to these websites that we put on there. There's a way to take a mental health screening. Mental Health America has lots of resources on their website. And then there is a national 24/7 hotline. And hotline is a good word, but it can also have a negative connotation. So you do not have to be in immediate crisis or suicidal to call a hotline. Hotline, just think of it as there is a warm person on the other end of the line at all times. So you can call that number 1-800-273-TALK. because you need to talk to someone. So just remember that, and Tanya and I are available after today if you want to talk through more about your local resources. If you're having difficulty accessing those, just give us a call or an email and we'll do our best to get you guided.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. And so with that, we just will remind everyone that we do always appreciate your feedback. So I'm dropping a link in the chat box. If you wouldn't mind hopping over and filling out that brief survey for us. This does two things. It helps give us feedback for the content, but also for the delivery method and style and any other comments that you would have. There's a text box where you can just write your general thoughts and feedback, and we do read those and take them very seriously for formulating future sessions. Which leads us to next Monday. I don't know if Megan's still on, if she wanted to say anything in specific, but she
had to hop off, but so she had to get to another meeting. So she asked me to share that even though it's on the flyer labeled family chaos, she's planning to talk in general about routines and taming the chaos of our daily lives. So regardless of if you're parenting and if you are parenting, so it's not family parenting specific was the main point.
Okay, perfect. And okay, that was my reminder to tell you all about the survey, which I had already put in the chat box, but I'm going to drop that one more time along with a link to request your certificate of completion. So once you've done the survey, if you want to hop on over to that other link, you can just put in your email address and it will be able to give you directions for submitting your certificate of completion. So did anyone else, while you're doing that, have any questions or comments, feedback, resources you wish we had shared that you've been looking for or that you're unsure about?
And we appreciate everybody's willingness and availability to be here and helping us work through this new delivery format for us. So when we talk about new normal, I mean, even as educators, we are experiencing having to do things differently. So virtual delivery and doing this type of thing is a little different for us. So we're learning every week, and we hope that we get back to the face-to-face classroom, but we're also learning that there are some pros and some positives to this format, and we were able to reach some people that wouldn't be able to come to classes. So keep that in mind when you're filling out surveys, because that's part of the information the whole Extension Network is looking for on our community members. You know, what are you needing, looking for, what format is working for you for educational programs. That helps us with our future planning. So there's one question in the chat about, is there a way to subscribe to more virtual trainings? One of the best ways is to look at the website of your local Purdue Extension office, and also follow the Facebook pages of the offices in your logistic geographic area, and also follow the main one at Purdue University Health and Human Sciences in West Lafayette. We all share each other's information with the virtual delivery. It doesn't matter where you live. You can attend the webinars. Some things get planned months in advance, some get planned really quickly, and so just seeing it come across social media or seeing it on the websites is going to be a good way for you to stay up to date on what's available.
And we do have, after this series ends next week, we have another one starting in October that's going to be about managing your finances and your personal possessions, so decluttering, writing a budget, credit scores, etc. And so if I'm getting ready to send out that email blast. So if you learned about this through my email list, then you should be expecting that in the next day or two. But I also put my contact information in the chat box. You're welcome to connect with me by Facebook or by just directly emailing me to make sure that I have you on my email list. And with that, if there's no other comments or questions, and assuming you have both those very important links that we provided you, I'm going to drop them one more time. I think we are finished for today. And so we thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you next week.
Tanya, real quick, this is Megan Jesperson. I just posted a link in the chat box actually, and I posted the wrong one, but for a webinar series for next week or for next month. So let me repost that again in case folks want to sign up for that. I'll throw that.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you guys for this awesome presentation.
And there's a question from Yolanda. Please send me that link. Yolanda, do you mean you need us to email you the link for the survey and the certificate? I don't know if she's still on.
For the finance. Okay. Yeah. I think Megan Jesperson is trying to grab that link and drop it in the chat box real quick. There you go. And again, these bit.ly links are case sensitive. So if you write that down, be sure that you note which ones are capital and lowercase. Otherwise, you should be able to just click on that and get signed up. And the registration information should automate just like it did for this series. And always give us your feedback about what other, we're pretty much planned through the end of the year, but if you have other topic requests, please let us know. One of our goals is to base what we do on the needs of the community. And so, all right. Well, with that, I will bid everyone a fond farewell and say have a nice day, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Joe, did you need anything from me before I clicked off?
I don't think so.
Okie dokie. Well, awesome job. I think I have everything posted on the website. Everything else should be set up. If you think of anything, let me know. And, well, I'll be seeing you in a couple hours anyways.
That's right. See you then.
All right. See ya.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care.